From the National Catholic Register, this is Register Radio, bringing light and clarity to the news and topics that affect your life.
Holy Week and Easter witnessed the terrible fire of Notre Dame in Paris and the evil attack in Sri Lanka. It's been a time of light and darkness, a time of loss and violence, even as Christians everywhere celebrated the resurrection. This week on Register Radio, we talked to Register correspondent Solene Tadie about the fire at Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris. Solene is from Paris. And we talk about the current state of the church in France. And then we catch up on the latest news and headlines, giving special attention to the Christian persecution in Sri Lanka. And on a much lighter note, the memorable speeches at the National Catholic Prayer Breakfast. I'm Jeanette DeMelo, editor-in-chief of the National Catholic Register and co-host of Register Radio, and I'm joined by Matthew Bunson, the Register's senior editor and co-host for Register Radio. Hi, Matthew.
Hello, good to be with you.
So, Matthew, every month we've been kind of doing this this chit-chat between the two of us on Register Radio, where we spend a whole segment just talking about the news of the month or of the week, and it's just a conversation between us without a guest. And we've never officially named this part of the show, but I think I'll do that now, and from here forward we'll call this the Editor's Roundup, and that's what we're going to do today, is talk about the news that we've kind of missed over the past few weeks. And what I wanted to start with was this week, Matthew, you attended there in D.C., in Washington, the National Catholic Prayer Breakfast on April 23rd. That's who attends that, first of all?
Well, it's the 15th annual prayer breakfast for the National Catholic Prayer Breakfast. We always have to sort of be very clear that we're talking about the National Catholic Prayer Breakfast rather than the National Prayer Breakfast, which also happens in the spring and is also very well attended. The National Catholic Prayer Breakfast brings together leaders of the Catholic world, certainly in the United States, literally from all over the country. Mm-hmm. And it's a remarkable gathering every year. I've always thought to myself that just the collective brain power and experience of Catholics in that room is a very impressive one. And what I love also is that EWTN broadcasts the prayer breakfast live, and it's carried, I know, on radio, and it deserves a lot of coverage, and I'm always very happy that we can give it the coverage that it deserves.
Yes, Loretta Brown, who's our new correspondent in Washington, commented that she always enjoys going because sometimes she sees people she didn't realize were Catholic, and that's I think a joy. And obviously there are Congress men and women there, as well as aides and people who work on the Hill. So I think it's a really interesting moment. And of course, one of the voices you heard from is a voice we've been hearing from a lot lately. It's the powerful witness of Abby Johnson, who was a former Planned Parenthood director and is now a pro-life activist and a Catholic.
Well, you're right. Her appearance sort of coincided with the unexpected, or shall we say unplanned, success of the movie Unplanned, which has taken a lot of people by surprise, as was noted during the actual breakfast. It has a 93% rating from, I think, Rotten Tomatoes based on the viewers. And it has become then a real conversation point for the pro-life movement. And Abby Johnson spoke, albeit briefly, but very powerfully about her witness. And of course, the great tagline, or the takeaway line from her was that God loves a good conversion story.
But she wasn't actually a keynote speaker, right?
That's right. Every year there are a couple of keynote speakers. In the last couple of years, we've had Cardinal Sarah, who was in town for this, and, of course, Vice President Pence. This year we had a couple of notables. The first is Bishop Thomas Olmsted of the Diocese of Phoenix, and then the other was Curtis Martin, of course, who's head of Focus.
Now, everyone can find out more information about the National Prayer Breakfast at ncregister.com. It's been covered by Loretta Brown, and CNA was also present. Catholic News Agency was also present, and we ran their story on the Register site. But I want to move on now to other news in Washington. Matthew, the presidential primary season is kicking into high gear. Let's review what's been happening.
Well, in what one can imagine is a rather polarized environment politically here in D.C., it sort of expresses itself with the very large number of Democrats who are jumping into the Democratic primary. Mm-hmm. And people always complain that in every election cycle, it seems to start earlier and earlier.
Sure.
Well, this year is no exception. Here we are in the early part still of 2019, and we already have about 20 Democrat potential candidates who are already canvassing the country, trying to get themselves noticed. And it runs everything from an Indiana mayor, of course, Pete Buttigieg, all the way up to the United States Senate with Kamala Harris and Elizabeth Warren, and, of course, the latest arrival in the primary season, former Vice President Joe Biden. This will be his third effort to become president.
Wow. And I've heard, so they're about 18 months. I mean, this is just the beginning, right. 18 months of this. But so far, it's the largest number of presidential candidates is what I've heard.
That's exactly right. Everyone is focused very heavily on what would be perceived as the two frontrunners. The first, of course, is Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders. Mm-hmm. Biden has been at the top of the polls largely because of name recognition, and Bernie Sanders was that runner-up in 2016 behind Hillary Clinton, and what we all remember was a very controversial primary season for him. And all targets then, all of the sights of the other candidates are focused on those two. And we're seeing already there's a great deal of up and down in the polls for the other candidates, and how they can get noticed, I think, is going to be one of those telling little signs as this summer progresses in the Democratic primary structure. But the other thing, too, is just fundraising. Right. And we've already had a brief flurry of activity out of Beto O'Rourke, who was the failed Senate candidate in Texas, who had a very splashy opening and is already losing key advisors from his campaign.
Yeah, so one of the things that I've been thinking about, and we haven't found anyone to write about this yet, but is just the role of social media in this. I mean, President Trump has obviously changed the way Twitter or the way social media is being used for official communications and whatnot, but it plays a great role in awareness of these candidates. And Beto O'Rourke is one of those examples who had this big splash due to social media and his power to use it. But I think there's a lot to watch there. And, of course, we will be covering the religious aspect. So how these candidates practice their faith and what that faith might be, Catholicism or evangelical Protestantism. So we'll be taking a look at this at the Register. So stay tuned for that.
And social media is important, as you note. Beto O'Rourke, I think, had the most memorable little social media moment when he actually broadcast his trip to the dentist.
Oh, gosh.
So this gives us a little taste of what the 2020 campaign is going to look like.
Well, my husband's a dentist, so I appreciate that. But I shout out to them. But hello, do we need to know when they go? So on to some very important news, though, and tragic news.
Yes.
The number of those killed in Sri Lanka continues to climb. These were terrible attacks, mainly on Catholic churches, but it was certainly on Christians, Christian worshipers on Easter Sunday. It's quite obvious that this was a religious persecution, and Islamic State has claimed responsibility for this. The death toll now exceeds more than 350. Matthew, what more should we know about this?
There are a couple things. First, as you note, the death toll continues to rise. We still have more than 500 wounded in Sri Lanka. The indications are, as you also noted, that the intelligence community did warn the Sri Lankan government, certainly their intelligence department, that something might be coming. And now it's become a real national controversy there as to what failed. And the leadership of Sri Lanka has said that expect pretty significant changes in what they call their defense forces within the next few days as they try to keep up. But also, it's very clear that this does have an international component to it. And if we think back over the last few years of the dreadful, horrifying Easter attacks in Egypt and elsewhere that are tied to these important dates for the Christians, Catholics in particular, we need to recognize the global dimensions of these attacks and the fact that, once again, Christianity is under attack in almost every corner of the globe.
Matthew, this is something that we have, I guess, struggled to have recognized by other media, the secular media. There were all sorts of strange comments early in this week. People hesitant to talk about this as Christian persecution. It was Easter worshipers, as if there was a fear to say the word Christian or to talk about a specific group that was being targeted. I think it's quite clear what this was, and we hope that we can bring to light the Catholics and the Christians that are suffering throughout the world because of their faith.
But this is also an important moment for us as those Easter believers,
Absolutely.
those Easter worshipers, to use the PC term that's now in circulation, to pray for our brothers and sisters around the world who are suffering this type of persecution, and also to do everything we can to pressure governments to recognize what's happening, and also to try to take steps to improve the situation facing them, where they live as a tiny minority group, or even places like France where Christianity is under attack.
That's right. And, we are getting ready to talk about the Notre Dame fire and the recovery of that fire. Of course, that's been really ruled an accident, but many people don't realize that throughout France there were a lot of vandalism of churches, and this is not only happening in France; it's happened here in the United States as well. So stay tuned. When we come back, we'll talk to Solene Tadie, our Europe correspondent, who will join us from Rome to talk about recovery after the fire of Notre Dame. This is Register Radio. More when we return.
This Easter season, read for faith, read for truth, read for life by giving yourself the gift of EWTN's National Catholic Register. Easter inaugurates a joyous season of hope and renewal that brings us closer to God. Gain a deeper understanding of His love and providence in reading the Register. Make this Easter season even more meaningful. Try the Register for free today and get it delivered to your home, office, or parish. To get your 6 free issues, order online at ncregister.com/radio or call 800-421-3230 and mention code RADIO. That's ncregister.com/radio or call 800-421-3230 and mention code RADIO. The National Catholic Register. Read faithfully.
Let's return to Register Radio on EWTN.
Welcome back. I'm Jeanette DeMelo, Editor-in-Chief of the National Catholic Register and co-host of Register Radio. I'm joined by Matthew Bunson, the Register's Senior Editor and co-host of Register Radio. And the two of us are joined by Solene Tadie, who is our Europe correspondent, works out of our Rome bureau. Solene, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Solene, we're talking about a tragedy that happened in your home country of France, in Paris, your hometown. And you have thankfully been covering that for us for the last couple of weeks. You've covered it for EWTN News Nightly. We're very grateful for the perspectives you've been able to bring. First of all, let's talk about just how your people have responded to this terrible moment with the loss of Notre Dame.
Yeah, at the beginning, as I was saying, the whole France was weeping. There was a communion around Notre Dame, and it was a kind of miracle. This is what I wrote in my article. There was a big wave of emotion following the blaze. But after a few days, I have to say that this wave of emotions was quickly replaced by a wave of polemics.
Yes.
From people who disapproved the fact that so much money is being given for a cathedral and not for the poor, but it comes from the left, and there are criticism from those who are calling for explanations because everything is so unclear. So there is a pretty strange climate now in France. So we are still weeping, but there are many doubts.
Right, and so you reference your article. It has run online at ncregister.com, but it also appears in our April 28th print edition. It's the lead story, the lead page one story of that print edition. And in it, you describe that for a brief moment, this was a pause to the polemics. It was a stop of the polemics. Let's talk about what those polemics have been, because they predate, obviously, the fire. And we refer to the Yellow Vest movement. What has the fighting, the political fighting, been about?
Yes, over the past few months, the Yellow Vest movement has been moving all of France. There are many protesters that go to the streets every Saturdays against the government's policies, especially fiscal policies. And Macron just didn't know how to deal with that. So he was supposed to address the nation precisely the day of the fire. So it was a very, very cleaved and a very divided France on the day of the fire, and such a blaze had an incredible impact that for a moment we were just able to gather together, and many people were praying. Of course, not all of them, but almost everyone agreed on the fact that it was part of our soul. So they implicitly agreed on the fact that Christianity is part of our soul, even if they wouldn't agree to say that so precisely. Right. But they implicitly agree about that.
Yeah, there's so much to unpack with what you just said. I mean, I immediately had that thought. I mean, to see people through social media, to see the crowd gathered outside of Notre Dame as the fire raged, and they were on their knees. I mean, they were praying, they were on their knees, they had rosaries in hand. Obviously, those were believers, but the sorrow expressed over this was not simply a sorrow at losing, a historical monument. I mean, it seemed to be something deeper. I think that's what you're talking about. But yet it's they don't have the words to say it because France, as I understand it, is so secularized.
Yes, and when I interviewed Father Grosjean, he told me that the most moving thing it was to see that people. So it was not just stones that were burning. Mm-hmm. It was something more. It was a huge part of our history. It has endured for more than 8 centuries, as I've been repeated. Countless artists and writers have been inspired by this place. Many kings and statesmen lived great moments in this cathedral. Right. We celebrated the liberation of Paris there, so it is our very soul. But it is the center of Christianity. It is the highest symbol of Catholicism in France, and no one can deny that.
Right, and the Register has editorialized about this in our most recent editorial. We have basically saying let's keep Notre Dame as a symbol of God's presence, and not a symbol of culture, and that's really what we need to hope and work for. The French people need to work for is that this doesn't simply become a temple of culture. As it became during the time of the French Revolution, a temple of reason rather than a temple of God. It is a temple of God. It is where the sacred host resides, and where people get in touch in a special way with our Lord.
Yes, and this is what worries me the most. I don't know if you heard about that, but today a law project was presented at the National Assembly for the restoration of Notre Dame, which would allow the government to bypass the current acts on the protection for the protection of heritage through ordinances to facilitate and accelerate the restoration works, because Macron is taking his credibility on this, and he wants the cathedral to be rebuilt in 5 years, which is almost impossible according to most experts. So we are very worried because we understand that it is meant to be ready for the Olympic Games of Paris in 2024. And we understand that it is connected, and so we are very worried that the place should be used as a cultural place just to enhance the Olympic Games and French entertainment. So we are very worried about that. Macron and the Prime Minister, Edouard Philippe, are already calling for a gesture towards modern architecture in tune with modern stakes and state of mind. Right. And they are already talking about lay spaces that would be built inside the cathedral. So it is very, so many people are very worried because some architects are already proposing to replace the spire with some kind of iron spires, very ugly things. Mm-hmm. So we need to be very careful now.
Right.
Well, the original cathedral took, I know, 200 years to build, and trying to get this repaired in 5 does strike some people perhaps as unrealistic. But to your point, and this is an important one that surfaced almost immediately after the fire, and that was what sort of secular monstrosities might be proposed in terms of the rebuilding. And we've seen these ideas of a glass roof that makes no sense because we still have the vault that would obviously block the sunlight, unless you're changing that too. And then as you've said, Solene, the spire issue really sparked a lot of controversy, certainly in social media, with these ideas. Somebody even proposed, I think, a minaret as a gesture to the Muslim community, and the occupation of Algeria by France. So is this the sort of thing that we can expect more of, or is there any possibility that Archbishop Michel Petit of Paris is going to be able to stop some of this?
I don't know if Archbishop will be able to stop that on his own, but there are many movements in France, protesting movements, so we might rely on it. There are many. There is also the French Federation of Restoration and Conservation that published a press release today explaining they are totally banned from public debate around the cathedral rebuilding. So it is something very significant, and people listen to that, and people are scandalized, and so they might react, and they might once again gather together to save the soul of the cathedral, and I'm expecting that.
You know, Solene, you've been working on a story about the other churches throughout France that have been vandalized. You know, they have said that this was an accident, probably related to the restorations that have been going on for some time now. So we don't want to claim that there's some sort of vandalism at Notre Dame, but it seems to me that there's a lot going on here that Macron is really just trying to use. He's becoming an opportunist, you know, using this for his political gain. Mm-hmm. And it seems that there are many voices we need to put out on the table. So I look forward to, you know, your stories about what is going on that is not getting attention. So what's going on with the churches, what's going on with Christians and those who want to maintain this as the mother church of a country. And that's what Notre Dame is, the mother church of a country. And so we're going to count on you to bring these smaller voices to the forefront, because the world needs to know. And I think most importantly, Catholics here in the United States and whoever is able to listen to EWTN to pray that this remains, Notre Dame remains a temple of God, and that somehow the secularism that has for many years taken hold of France can be reversed. And we pray that that be the case. We're all out of time, but we're counting on you, Solene.
Yes, I will do my best, because we are living a huge crisis in France. Desecrations and vandalism is raging all over Europe, but it is worse in France. Every day something happened, and it happened also during Easter. Very few media talked about that, but there were other fires and vandalisms in several churches of France, even during Easter celebrations. It didn't stop. And the media just won't talk about that. So the Catholic in France are very, very worried about that. But they are, at the same time, encouraging initiatives. There is a group on the social media, a group of young French. It is called Protect Your Church, Protège ton Église. And many young people are all around France organizing themselves in order to go to the most emblematic churches in France to protect them during celebrations.
Oh, wow.
And yes, it is a very interesting movement that was created a few weeks ago, and it is already it has a lot of success on the social media. So it is very interesting. It is worth following it.
Yeah, that's very good. And also, Solene, in your story about the Yellow Vest movement, this was obviously before the fire. Mm-hmm. You wrote that these people are not just, blazing activists, that many of them also are Christian. Describe the Yellow Vest, the people who are a part of this Yellow Vest movement.
Yeah, it has changed a lot over time, because at the beginning, the Yellow Vest protesters were not. Unfortunately, the movement was kind of taken by the left,
Sure.
and many people are destroying places. But
it's violent. It has become violent. Yeah.
Yes, it is becoming more and more violent. And at the beginning, I spoke with the bishop, Monsignor Ginou, in my interview. He explained to me that many protesters were actually asking for masses on the streets, and many priests are actually, and they're still celebrating mass on the street, and they witness the fact that people are they call for a renewal of spirituality in France. They see their despair, and they are lacking a real popular spirituality. Many of them are wearing medals of Padre Pio, for instance. So according to them, it is a very interesting sign that must be followed, and it is an opportunity of evangelization for them. So that's why many priests are trying to follow the movement, even if it's not so. It doesn't hit the headlines, but it does exist.
Well, we're grateful that you'll soon be back in Paris and you can report to us from the ground there. So we look forward to that reporting. And as always, we join you in prayer, and especially as you watch your country struggle in this moment, you'll be in the prayers of your team here at the Register, but also all of our listeners. Thanks, Solene.
Thank you for having me.
Remember, for more news, analysis, and commentary, check out the National Catholic Register online at ncregister.com. Thanks for joining us here on Register Radio at EWTN. For Matthew Bunson and our producer Jeff Burson, I'm Jeanette DeMelo. Until next week, God bless you.